This is PitchDeck Asia. We are in the asiatechpodcast studio. My name is Graham Brown, joined by Jay Huang. Jay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
It's great to have you here.
Yep.
A couple of my favorite subjects, recruiting, HR, AI as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about all of that in the context of Pulsifi. You're the CEO and co-founder.
Yep.
We're going to talk about your journey, how you got there. It's quite an interesting journey, not a straight line, but that's always how it works in the world of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
We have your pitch deck, so we are going to look at the pitch deck as well whilst we go through it. If you're listening, by the way, just on the audio version, you can grab the video and the pitch deck from PitchDeck.Asia. You'll be able to access all the information about Jay and Pulsifi.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start at the top. Let's talk about why we're here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this problem of people and startups and companies as well. I mean, I find that there's two problems really that I'm not just talking about just startups today. I mean, organizations have finding money and finding good people. And finding good people is increasingly harder, especially here in Singapore, for example. And there's a lot of, different sort of factors going on. There's a lot of competition for talent. There's a lot of people who, want to work in a specific type of culture, which not necessarily you'll find in the corporate world or the startup world or so on. So let's talk about Pulsifi. At the top of the billing, Jay, what is the problem that you're solving?
Okay. The problem we are solving is most organizations out there aren't able to hire and grow the people that they really need. Right, and we see that as a two-pronged issue. And number one is they don't understand enough the people that they are seeing and the people that they have in the organization. And the other problem is they actually don't know what they need for the organization. So we are setting up to solve these two parts of that problem. So if I may just elaborate a bit more on that, I think number one, if you think about understanding people, if you asked any employer out there what would they ideally want in a great employee, they would probably tell you, I want somebody who is a good leader, a good team player, they're motivated to learn, they've got grit. And the amazing thing is when a lot of employers are sort of screening or identifying candidates right now, they're looking at CVs. And on the CVs, you don't see any of these things that you're really looking for. So there's a great mismatch between how employers are looking at people but trying to understand versus what they really need. So that's problem number one. And how we're solving that is really helping organizations to understand people a lot deeper, a lot more holistic, right? Which we can talk about more later. The other problem is what do they really need, right? So again, a lot of employers operate through a gut feel mechanism. Like, okay, I think we need a certain sort of skill set to do this. And if I just may give an example, if, for example, you were looking to hire a salesperson, I think most people would say, you know what, we need extroverted people to do sales, right? Because they need to be outgoing, they need to talk. But have they exactly looked into the organization to see if the extroverted people did better at sales? Sometimes no, right? Sometimes they could be just as good as anyone else, or sometimes it could even be worse because extroversion may not be the thing that drove people to do well at sales. So for example, with some of our clients, we realized that the thing that was important is not so much extroversion, but about this quality of people warmth, which is, can I make my client like me? And that actually drove sales better. So the question is, can you actually figure out what you really need, right? And then match it back to number one. Can you find that quality in those people that you're seeing so that you can actually identify the right kind of people you want in your team? And then for those people that you already have in your team, how do you grow them into where you want them to be?
Right. Okay, so the core of this is you're quantifying the skills and the personalities and the qualities of people in organizations, right? So this is the challenge. It's not an easy process. I mean, for years and years, people have been doing, for example, personality tests in organizations, and we all know the limitations in that, but you're sort of taking this well beyond that. We're going to talk about AI and predictive analytics in this process, right? So maybe we can start at the top, and if we jump into your pitch deck, Jay, at the top, you've got the data there, which highlights what the problem is. And for those that are listening, let me read this out. 95% of employers seldom look beyond the CV. That's shocking.
It is true.
Seldom look beyond the CV. I mean, okay, are we talking about a certain type of employer? I mean, as a startup founder, but we're in the minority, right? That I feel that I always look beyond the CV, but I'm in the minority. Most people don't.
I think we're talking about the first sort of screen of how you figure out whether this is somebody you want to spend more time on.
Right.
And generally, people have used the CV as that screen. But I guess the issue there is they tend to look for things like, what did they do in school? And then what were they doing right before this? It's difficult to actually figure out things like the qualities that you really need out of there. Plus, in many big organizations, they're dealing with rather high volumes of candidates. So sometimes it's just for a lack of time, bandwidth, and they end up doing that, right? So there's definitely a group of people, employers who would go beyond, even do interviews properly, definitely. But that's definitely the minority today.
Yeah, and I imagine as well is that in many cases that the people who are tasked with recruiting or employing within an organization probably feel that they should stick to the script, which is stick to what's in the CV, because if I was to recruit you, Jay, on the basis of like, I think you're a good guy, I wouldn't be able to justify that if anything was to go wrong, or, I have to justify that to the manager I'm suddenly putting Jay in the team of, right?
Yes.
So it's a risk factor, isn't it? And, when you're recruiting, you probably just have a process which they have to follow. And the bigger the organization, the bigger the process, right? The more complicated.
Yep.
You put in here as well that 86% of employers cannot justify the way they hire.
Yes.
What's going on there?
So that's back to the first point that you made, which is follow the process. So, for example, I think what's commonly happening is you'll see, okay, I hired this person because he did a similar role in another company in our industry.
Right.
Right. So assumption is he can probably do something similar for us. And he was trained in a field that was relevant, right? So it's very explainable. But if you had 5 of these people, who would you choose? And then it comes down to the feel of it. Like, okay, this guy feels more right. I think culturally this guy could feel better, like a better fit. But it's very gut feel. It's difficult to explain why. So what we're trying to do is, like you mentioned, use data to define that, right? Did it boil down to, for example, him being somebody who's open to new experiences? So it helps with roles that require innovation. Or was it something about him being a very conscientious person, very disciplined, very organized? So it helps with things like seeing through execution. So we can actually define all the softer side like this and be able to help employers justify why they pick certain people this way. And if you think about then the methodology isn't too different from following the old script. You're just having a new script that moves with the times.
Got it.
Yeah.
The old script, and we'll look at how you do it in a minute with the solution. The old script very much is geared towards eliminating risk, isn't it? For example, you mentioned, let's say this guy had done a similar business development role in a similar vertical sector, and he'd done that for 10 years. It doesn't tell me that he's good at it. It just tells me that he's not bad at it, because if he survived 10 years, then he surely must have at least made a few of his targets. Doesn't tell me he can come into my organization and make a difference. It just tells me he's not going to screw up. So the whole system is geared towards eliminating failure or risk, which not necessarily identifies the right kind of person you want in your organization. You're just going to get very mediocre people at best, right?
Yeah. So I mean, we feel that anybody in an organization has a couple of what we call perspectives of fit, right? So there's a fit to role component, which is, yes, he's done business development, that's a fit in the role. There's a fit to team and leader, which is, can he work with the rest of the team well? Can he work with the leader well? And there's a third, which is, can he fit the organization, which is a cultural fit. So him having done something in another company in the industry does not really say anything about fit to the team or fit to the culture, right? And they could be actually very big factors as well, because, I mean, if you go around asking, why do people leave their jobs? Most of the time, it's not because of the job. It's because of the team, the culture, the boss. So those are equally important factors that we tend to overlook if we use the old script.
Okay, so we have to go a level deeper and unpack the data. So let's have a look at the solution. We jump back into the pitch deck. If we were to have a look at slide 5, we've got the sort of the top level of the solution that you have here, which is what you call predictive performance analytics, and what you use at Pulsifi to effectively understand what you just said. What exactly is predictive performance analytics?
Okay, so it's actually To be honest with you, Graham, we had struggled a bit to define the space that we play in.
Right.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about that since you're here.
Please.
So generally, the human resource function has been a bit on the catch up in terms of embracing analytics, right? Versus something like sales and marketing, which has been doing it for probably the past 10, 15 years.
Right, yeah.
Very data-driven kind of activities for HR. There's something new. So recently, this concept of people analytics spawned, right? But within people analytics, it's such a big domain. You can look at how efficient people are. That's people analytics. You can look at what the distribution of a workforce is. That's also people analytics. And for us, actually, it's a different kind of analytics. We're focusing on the individual. So I can almost call it person analytics, right? But whatever. So here, what we're saying is predictive performance, because our main interest is to figure out how much somebody would do well in that role. And it's predictive because we use a lot of models that are not just based on data, but also based on science like organizational psychology, right? To predict basically how well could people perform in the role, in the team, in the organization.
So you have a few input factors there,
Yes.
which I'm assuming on the slide in the bottom corner, you've got CV, psychometric assessments, employee performance data, and social media footprint. So you're taking everything from what they've disclosed on their CV to what they've said on social media. Could you give us an example of how you would actually use that? So would it be like a Facebook posting that you would measure in some way?
Yes. So let me start with an analogy. So if you were a hiring manager or a HR person, what information would you have to sort of evaluate somebody? So yes, there's generally a CV. Some employers may request candidates to take, psychometric tests, personality tests. And generally, I think some employers would also just like look somebody up on LinkedIn or Facebook and see if, common connections, what are the topics of interest. And then in certain cases, you actually have employees and they've got data. So our approach basically has been, how do we help organizations to deal with the data that they already have and put it together in one place? Hence, we call it Unify. So the challenge we see is many organizations have the data, but they're all over the place. And if you think about it, for each candidate, you've got, their CV, assessments, social media stuff. You form a view of one candidate. Great. And then you start doing it for 10, for 100. It completely cannot
falls
handle
apart.
it.
Yes, the process.
So actually, what we're doing basically is to make that more feasible, to put it all together. So I wouldn't say we are trying to reinvent any process by taking in new data, because we're not out here to re-engineer the process, but really use the existing data they have, put them together, make sense of it, create profiles out of these people. So on the CV, generally we're looking for things like competencies, experience. For psychometric assessments, we touch on. Okay, so maybe just on that. So our intention is to understand the softer side of people. And one of the ways to do it is through assessments, right? So if the company has it, we can use that. If not, we can offer ours. And ours is based on science, so it's accepted by most organizations. The social media one is an interesting topic because researchers have, for the past 10, 15 years, been looking at how things like content on social media actually say something about us as people, right? Be it interests or personality. So we're basically using some of these frontier research to incorporate into our offering. So for example, based on how somebody expresses themselves, the words that they use, there is a relationship with their personality. So for example, people who are very emotional, who display a broad range of emotions, they tend to use a broader range of emotional words in the way they express themselves. So this is just one example, but there are 100, 200 of these points.
It's a good indicator, right?
Yes. So,
should we put it to the test?
Oh yeah.
We've kind of like, just before we went on there, we hatched a plan. You found somebody out there that we're going to put to the test and see if this makes sense. So, Barrett, if you can do the honors here, we're going to flash up. So this is data that you get from the Pulsifi website, right? So we're going to look at the Pulsifi website. And here we have our subject for study, a young gentleman called Graham Brown, just picked randomly.
Yep.
So obviously you've pulled data to some part from my LinkedIn account, right?
Yes.
What I'm interested, I mean, that's all sort of obvious. You can get that from LinkedIn, but you've got in here this bit about personality.
Yes. Maybe,
Can we have a look at that? Am I going to be surprised what you're going to put up here?
Maybe I should do, you shouldn't look at it. Maybe I should ask you.
Yeah, a caveat, please.
Yes. So basically what we're predicting is, I think a few spikes about you. One of which is particularly noticeable is you are somebody who's very open to experiences, right? And actually, if you don't mind, if you scroll down. Okay, so in openness to experience, you find that it's made up of things like imagination.
I see you break it down, right? Yeah.
Emotionality, adventurousness, blah, blah, blah. So for Graham, for example, somebody who appreciates art, right? Okay, that's actually important for people to be able to embrace new kinds of ways of doing things. You are adventurous, right? And then also intellectual in the sense that you like to engage in the philosophical topics, and liberal, right? Open-minded. The part that is relatively less, I would say, developed would be your emotionality in the sense.
Say it, call it as it is. So let's develop. So where are my weak points there?
I won't call it a weak point. It's just that you tend to be more in control of yourself versus having a broad range of emotional experiences. Yeah.
And agreeableness. Does that mean I'm agreeable or I agree with other people?
Yeah. So that one I should clarify. Psychologists call it agreeableness, but actually it's not related to being agreeable. It's really a measure of somebody's warmth as a person.
I should be more. It says here Graham should be more modest.
Yeah. So yes. I think So I think what we had analyzed here are also some of your posts on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Maybe you were very authoritative in some of them.
Yeah,
so
maybe.
that's the reading that came out of it.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I wonder as well if that, there's always, put it in its place. There's a danger here, isn't it? Like with horoscopes, it's like you read, for example, if I said about you, I could just make something up, and you'd say, oh, that's me. That's exactly how I feel. So how do you sort of avoid that actually it's actionable rather than, if you sat here and go, like Graham's like a natural leader and, all these kind of things. Anybody you sat with would probably say, yeah, that's me. Or, maybe they find challenges in their life or, everybody can agree to certain things. How can you get that specificity that it actually is that person rather than just a generic horoscope style analysis?
Yes. Okay. So whether or not horoscopes are accurate, that's another topic for conversation. So let's not get there. But actually, to answer your question, actually there are three ways of looking at it. So number one, a lot of our predictions are actually based on psychology. So researchers have actually used thousands of people to analyze. So safe to say there's a certain rigor there in terms of trying to predict things from data points about people. So that's one of our bases. The second is we actually also have a base of people who have taken our psychometric assessments. So in a sense, we know the right answer from the assessments.
Right, you have the patterns already, right?
Yes, so we already know, for example, the people who display a certain trait, what kind of data points tend to describe that. And the third one also is we collect feedback from users. So, for example, if we tell a potential employer that this candidate has a certain trait, the employer gets to provide feedback to say, yeah, is it true or no, not really. So that also trains the algorithm. Yep.
How do I use that as an employer then? Because if I was to look at my own data, how do I use the fact that, maybe my weak point is emotionality and my strength is, I can't remember, adventurousness. That could be taken either way. I mean, adventurousness could be, for example, he doesn't turn up at the office on a Friday. Right? He's off on an adventure somewhere. So how does that inform me as an employer? Because what's on the CV is a lot easier to identify, in terms of black or white, what this means in terms of their behavior. However, when you start throwing out these personality traits, it could go either way.
Yes. So if you remember when we started the conversation today, we spoke about problem one, about understanding people. So that's what we just saw. Problem two was understanding what organizations need. So that is also very critical, which is, number one, does adventurousness matter for the role that you're looking at, right? And it may not, right? Or it may. So how we establish that is, again, we do use organizational psychology as the basis. We also use the organization's existing employees as a benchmark. So, for example, if we're hiring for that business development role, there have been 100 people who have done that role over the past 5 years.
Right.
We can actually say, the people who didn't do better, they are adventurous, so that's a plus.
Yeah.
Right. Or it may not matter, and then we say that, no big deal, he's not adventurous, but it doesn't matter to the role. So we use the organization's own data to explain to them basically what you should be looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
And the key here is that you're eliminating bias, aren't you? And the bias, like you mentioned before, a great example is sales.
Mm-hmm.
There is an image, and I've done sales and I've recruited sales, that a sales person should look like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're the classic, what you see selling a used car type salesperson or an estate agent, for example, right?
Yep.
However, we don't know if actually that's the case, and that's a bias that people go in. So if you come to me in an interview, Jay, and said you were looking for a business development manager role, and I'd look at you and think, well, he doesn't look like a sales guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has these certain traits. But you're saying, for example, if you were to look at your history in the organization, maybe you find, for example, that the salespeople who are most successful were a bit more introverted, a bit more process driven, and a bit more sort of gentler in their sales process.
Yep.
Depending on the type of product and the culture of the sales organization.
Yes, correct.
So that bias is key, isn't it? Because that's a huge factor in recruitment and making the wrong decision.
Yes, absolutely. I think the idea is to be able to use data to justify why you hire, which is, I think, one of those things that are missing sometimes. But maybe I can add on something interesting here is, while we can benchmark against existing people, we can also help organizations to transform. If they want to know that they want to get people from, A to B, we can actually figure out, right, most of the people right now are kind of A prime, and then this is the kind of B that we want to get to, and then we can actually help to provide that basis.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have a look at a case study here with Nestle as an example. And just before we do this, can this work for a small company, like a startup?
Yes. So
because we don't have that history, right?
So then the data would be more generic,
right.
Based on a broader set of companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we can talk about potential long-term in other markets as well. Let's start with Nestle because, again, Nestle, like any employer, would have the challenges of just a huge organization and many different sort of departments and multinational, and their recruitment process must be a long recruitment process and have many stages because they just want to eliminate risk at every stage, right? So how did you work with Nestle? How did you come in? Where did you start? Because you couldn't have reinvented the whole recruitment process. You must have had to just take a small part of it as to prove a case in point. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So let's start from the beginning. I think fortunately, some of our team members knew the Nestle people, right, from their time in the industry, and it's been perceived as a good employer. And one challenge that they do face is at the fresh graduate level, such as for management trainee roles. There tend to be a lot of applicants that express interest. They apply. I wouldn't say there's a challenge. I'm sorry, take that back. It's not a challenge. It's a good thing. The challenge is how do you figure out how to who you want.
Well, that is a challenge. It's noise, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, right. It's noise.
No,
I mean,
it's
say it as it is. Yeah, it's noise. I'll say it for you.
It's a good problem to have. So in the past, what they've done is they actually screen those, for example, 3,000 people who applied for management trainee positions manually, right? So yes, like what we spoke about, looking at CVs, trying to find interesting candidates, and then for those that are interesting, give them a call. Right, you spend 20 to 30 minutes talking to each one of them, and then after a while, you got to start remembering how do they stack against each other and figure out, who are the final people that I want to interview to greater depth. But because it's so much manual work involved, it's also sometimes you need to outsource some part of the work to a third party. But the thing is, the more people do that screening, the less it is. The more difficult it is to ensure consistency, because depending on who screens, people would pass for different reasons. As much as you want to have a consistent rubric for it. So I think one sentiment is the consistency is challenging to maintain, and I think the other part that's very interesting is being able to justify why people were hired, right? So I think back to what we had discussed before. So when we came in to say, hey, let's try this, right? We can propose a more data-driven solution. technology driven. So not only will you save a lot of man hours, right, which would come with it, but we can also look at improving the quality because we can understand each person better, and we can also figure out how to select the people that you actually need, right? So we put this. The applicants were fortunately very cooperative to be able to want to go through our process. So we did put them through various psychometric assessments. It may sound daunting, but actually it takes like 15 minutes, right? So it's not that bad. But for some of these roles, sometimes there are also things like reasoning assessments, like cognitive ability reasoning, verbal, numeric reasoning. That could take longer. But for some roles, those are quite important to measure your thinking. So we collected a whole bunch of data on these people. Concurrently, we did a benchmark on existing employees to figure out what are the things that are really important. So out of this whole exercise, we helped them to whittle it down to a final 200 or so.
Right.
Right, from 3,000 to 200. And then from there, they conducted their own in-person activities as well.
So when you compare it to how it was traditionally done, you mentioned one of the problems, I think, not just of Nestle, but of any large organization, is they have to outsource. So you have many, many different steps and many, many different people. And you're sort of, the more steps you have in the process, the less likely you have somebody who can create a more generic overview of, I like this person, the data's good, the tests are good, and so on. So it's all sort of outsourced, and everybody's kind of like doing their little box filling exercise.
Yes.
When you do it your way, how sort of much can you compress that recruitment process into less steps?
Yes. So we actually, if you look at the next slide, we touched on the man-hour savings. So it's 70% of the benchmark. Actually, it was 70 to 80%.
3 weeks to 3 days you've got here.
Yes, that is the time taken to notify the candidates.
In between stages.
Yes.
Wow. And that's where you lose a lot of candidates, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So it's one of those intangible things, but it's very important because you don't want the candidates to wait. So you can actually shrink that down. Plus, you can reduce man hours. So one big thing that we did that's different was basically bringing a lot of the in-person activities online. Right. So things like testing, it can be done in the candidate's own time. We also, rather than do phone screening, we also proposed video interviews through our partner company. And basically for a video interview, the candidate can choose when they want to do it. Right. So you also eliminate the need to schedule on both sides. And of course, not just the time to schedule, but also the time to execute whatever you are scheduling, right? So that's those are the things that we saved as well. So yeah, to answer your question, we compress a lot of the manual components into an online component, and then those are the reduction in man hours. But I think the real value that comes out of here is, can we show that we did a better job in helping you to find the people that you need? And in this case, we were able to show there's actually improvement in quality because we were able to answer what are the traits you actually need. And we can show you that everybody who we select for you has what you need. Versus in the past, it might have been 50% because you didn't really know that.
Okay. This is also important when now, these days, increasingly large organizations want to recruit talent and they're in a competitive marketplace with the Grabs and the Facebooks and the Googles of this world. And they don't necessarily have the sort of huge projects which they feel they could go and fulfill in a place like Google. And they have to move fast. And the problem is, if they're taking 3 weeks before, you can actually notify them of the next stage, you lose that talent. And when we're talking about that level of talent, people who can move around, who can choose jobs, who can, who know that they're a marketable commodity out there, is that they have to move fast. So to get it down to 3 days is a key composite of making a successful, for those large organizations to bring in talented people.
Yes.
Right, because they just can't compete in that market against those big brand names in tech, for example.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, and just before, I'm conscious of the time ourselves, is that I'm a data guy.
Yes.
So any sort of chart that fires up on a pitch deck, it gets attention here. So
okay.
I want to know what this says. So for example, if you're listening on the audio, then you can see this just basically on the video, but just to basically explain what this is, it's a comparison of an XY plot. On the left-hand side, predicted personality trait, very, very similar to assessed trait. On the right-hand side, performance predictable from trait with statistical significance. What does it mean? Explain to us.
Yes. So if on the left chart, basically we're trying to, because you asked me, right, how spot on do we get when we try and predict somebody's personality, right? So I think that is one chart we show that with enough data, the R-square for that can get very close to 1, right? So the idea is based on data that we can collect, actually the chance of us predicting the trait value that's going to be similar to what you would have gotten through the assessment is really high, right? So I think that's a proof that with enough data, we can make good predictions. But of course, the caveat there is you need enough data. And yes, we may not be that case all the time. So for example, some people do not have online presence, right? They write very little in their CV. And then how do you try and assess these guys? Yeah, you might have to fall back to an assessment. You might have to fall back to interviews. So for the chart on the second, which is okay, if you guys can predict personality well, what do I do with that personality? So the question becomes, can we identify traits, not just personality, but anything else that actually predicts performance? So the work we did in this case study was actually a fintech company. And in this company, actually, this is not a very big company. I think they've got 30, 40 people at that point in time. But the important thing is everybody in this company, regardless of role, they were looking for a few common traits, which is they wanted people who were innovative. They wanted people who were good team players and communicators. But it's very difficult to figure these two out from testing or from interviews, right? So what we helped them to do was to run the analysis, and we figured out that certain personality traits predict these qualities very well. So, for example, innovativeness in this company, it was very strongly predicted by somebody being open to new experiences, right? And the good team players and communicators were strongly predicted by the trait of agreeableness that we discussed before. So, while it's difficult to assess innovativeness quickly, you can actually assess the personality trait quite well, and then that could increase the odds of you finding somebody who has the traits that you want.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Because even myself as a recruiter in a small company, is that I have my own biases. And you say innovativeness as an example. I want everybody to be innovative. How do you measure that? Well, when they come to interview, they say all the right things. Yes. They know, they can buy the books where they can practice the questions and so on.
Yep.
That bit where you can go outside of the CV and look at, for example, social media and what people are posting out there as an example, is very interesting, because that isn't done for the purpose of recruitment. That's sort of them in their real world every day. That's the real them rather than the recruitment them, right? Yes. And you're saying that based on what you've analysed there, you can, with a certain degree of accuracy, trace that to performance in certain organisations that need innovativeness.
Yes, correct. It's actually a two-step process. I think number one is we define that person based on a number of traits. I think close to 40 of them, based on all this data that we gather about them. And just now I mentioned something about video interviews. It's also possible to analyze videos to get science out of it as well. So whatever means we build these profiles of people, then the second step becomes understanding which of these traits actually matter for that role, right? So in this case, because this particular company we just discussed, they've got enough data in terms of 360 feedback from peers and all that. So it's really rich information on how innovative people actually are, right? Because not just the boss, but other people think so as well. So that really helped us to build the models.
Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
And just finishing up, I want to ask you about your current fundraising. Are you raising funds at the moment?
Didn't you say before that people are always raising funds?
Exactly. Well, I have to ask because
yes,
it's endless, right?
Yes.
They're always recruiting. They're always raising funds, right? So where are you with your fundraising?
So actually, I think it was a month ago we've announced that we raised an angel round.
Yep.
It came up to about 1.1 million US. It was done actually over multiple tranches since last year. So the total amount came out to be 1.1.
Right.
Most of that money we've actually used to build the product. I think you may have guessed it's quite difficult to build what we're trying to build. And so we actually had to invest a fair bit there, building the team to develop that. And that money was also for us to show that we can actually deliver value to real clients out there. So I think we've been quite happy with what we've achieved. And I think that what we plan to do in the coming couple of months to a year is to scale that model to build more applicability. And definitely then as part of the process to scale, we will need to raise more money as well. Yeah.
So have you thought about when the round starts? Is it to be confirmed? Or?
I think we're looking at something towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And that would be a Series A?
Those are semantics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think we're looking at a couple of $1 million.
Yeah. Okay. And what would that be for? Would that to be fund? I mean, because you've sort of explored the market already. Yes. Would that be to fund development in Singapore, or would that also to be to fund, new markets?
Yes. So actually, a big part of why we're doing what we're doing is because we feel that this is a global opportunity. Most companies face some sort of challenge like this, and we feel that the market is really global. So a big part of our expansion plan is also to explore markets that are far further away from here, right? So things like Australia, Europe, the US, that's where we're targeting as well. Definitely to expand into all these markets takes a lot of money. We can't do that. So I think we're using a mix of partners as well as our own teams to explore some of these markets further away.
Yeah. So talking about partners, what kind of partners are you looking for? Who would be sort of prime for what fits with what you want to do?
Yes. So that part is actually pretty broad. Currently, our partners include technology companies like SAP because they've provided systems to a lot of companies out there. So ours is sort of like a platform that sits on top. There's some distribution channel there. We've also got partners in the form of recruitment agencies, right? They're providing service. I think we can complement that with data, with technology. We've also got some partners who are more consultants. I think they're coming in to, for example, help clients improve their proposition to potential joiners. And then part of that process becomes, okay, how do we identify who to target, what the kind of people we need, and then we sit in there as well. There are also partners who are like resellers. I think what they do is to help clients to buy technology that solves their problems. So that's a channel as well.
Excellent. Jay, it's been a privilege sitting with you today. What is the best way people can get hold of you? What's your preferred channel?
LinkedIn. Yes.
LinkedIn. Okay.
Yes.
All the details in the show notes. So if people want to reach out to Jay, whether they want to work with Jay, work for Jay, or help in the future fundraise, help expand the business. It's Jay Huang, everybody, CEO and co-founder of Pulsifi. Thanks so much for coming for the shows today. Been a real privilege, and wish you all the best with the ongoing growth of Pulsifi.
Thank you very much,
and
Graham.
Build the biggest data set in the world, so we can really kind of analyze people and work out, what their advantages and the benefits of these organizations.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, if I may just add one last thing.
Go for it.
While we are solving a problem from an organizational perspective, I think our bigger vision is to help everybody out there figure out what they should be doing with their lives at work, right? But we've chosen to solve it from the perspective of the job opportunity because that's where it tangibly happens. But I think ultimately we do want to benefit everybody out there to basically answer that question that you just said.
I like it. Put a dent in the universe.
Yes.
Exactly. So anybody who's interested in that, you put the call out, who thinks of this in terms of the bigger picture, make contact with Jay. So Jay, thanks a lot today.
Thank you very much.